You know, Playboy itself, the magazine, and Hugh Hefner never really appealed to me. My initial understanding was that Playboy was a naked lady magazine for pervy boys who either didn't have access to the internet or shared a family computer. As a tween in the early 2000s, I was vaguely aware of Hugh Hefner. I knew he was the face, founder, and editor-in-chief of Playboy magazine, and very famous, mostly because of how he would pop up and cameo for a lot of TV shows. And I knew he was a big deal to a lot of people, mostly because of his lifestyle. Hugh Hefner was my first notable example of polygamy. He always had multiple rotating girlfriends and was representation of a perpetual bachelor that a certain type of male would practically worship. And although my personal view of polygamy has mostly been one man with multiple women who are ironically each in a monogamous relationship with that one man, based on these examples, in my opinion, it is an obvious detriment to the majority of women who participate in it. But at least Hugh Hefner was rich about it, you know? It was easier to accept polygamy with him because he could actually afford so many girlfriends. In my opinion, this style of polygamy, where it's one man with multiple monogamous women, is a lifestyle that should only be allowed to wealthy men. And it freaks me out how a large group of particular type of men in our current timeline feel like every man is entitled to it. Like, as if. And Hugh Hefner totally had a type. Super blonde, super young, white, with super fake big boobs. But what I found extremely jarring was how young his girlfriends were. By the time I started recognizing Hugh Hefner, he was already old, so I always knew him as an old man. And it was crazy seeing his girlfriends who looked more like his granddaughters than anything else. And I guess to a certain type of man, that's goals. But from the point of view of a young girl and most women, it's pretty freaking creepy. But for some reason, I always saw the girlfriends as more of an accessory for Hef, used to not only play up his image as a perpetual bachelor and playboy, but also advertisement of the Playboy brand. Because again, as a young girl, I thought there's no way those young ladies are doing boyfriend-girlfriend stuff with this old man. However, although I recognized that I was not the target audience for Playboy, there was a sudden shift that changed my impression of the brand completely. Their marketing did a 180 and suddenly I was being lured in. And it wasn't long before I found myself buying all kinds of merchandise that stamped that cute little bunny. It really changed the entire way I perceived Playboy. Even now, when I think about Playboy and everything associated with the brand, I instantly think of sexy pinups, cute bunny corsets with tails and ears, the color pink, huge boobs, and essentially the female appeasing impression I got from one of my favorite early 2000 TV shows, The Girls Next Door.
Digs and dates and the grips and the kicks, hey!
The Girls Next Door aired a total of 6 seasons from 2005 to 2010 on E! Network, the same network that aired the documentary series True Hollywood Story, the TV series Fashion Police, as well as a ton of reality shows like The Simple Life, Dr. 90210, Kimora Life in the Fab Lane, and even the OG Kardashian series that people actually watched, Keeping Up with the Kardashians. The Girls Next Door was a reality TV show that gave insight into the life of the Playboy Mansion from the POV of the 3 current girlfriends of Hugh Hefner, Holly, Bridget, and Kendra. Through the TV show, which seemed to document each girl and her day-to-day, we also saw the behind-the-scenes operation of the Playboy magazine, as well as a look into the Playboy culture, which of course was a lot of extravagant parties, dinners, press, Playboy events, and modeling. But oddly enough, there was also a family element shown of birthday celebrations, game nights, pets, hobbies, hometown visits, movie nights, dinners with friends, and seeing all of this from the perspective of the girls made it super interesting to me. I really liked the episodes where they traveled across the globe. They went all over Europe, Jamaica, and a few different places in America, mostly Vegas. Also, being rich in Southern California was a very popular subgenre for reality TV, and it was a nice touch. It was cool to see the luxury aspects of the girls' lives at the mansion, like having butlers and chefs, riding in limos and private jets, and as you could probably guess, being in the early 2000s, they had a ton of dogs. And the mansion had what was practically a mini zoo on property with exotic birds and monkeys. It was cute to see the girls' friendship with the models of the Playboy magazine, who are known as playmates, and give insight to those women and their careers as well. And it was really cool seeing Holly, Bridget, and Kendra model for the magazine too. And to me, the show made the girls and their lifestyle really likable, although I know that was not the case for a lot of people who judged them for their lifestyle and posing nude. I can't honestly say that the girls felt relatable because A, I was a teenager watching the show, and B through Z, although I did admire the celebration of sexual femininity, both the girls and Playboy presented a standard of beauty that was unrealistic and exclusive towards me. And yes, I did notice when the show would sprinkle in a few black playmates, and I'm more aware now that the Playboy Club did have black bunnies as well. It still wasn't enough representation to give me the impression that Playboy was diverse or inclusive enough towards my phenotype, especially at the time. I never saw enough black girls being associated with Playboy, especially on the show, which, you know me, I totally side-eye. So they weren't exactly my standard of beauty. Plus, there was something about the early 2000s where TV and internet was just so obtusely out of touch and offensive when it came to black people and black culture, which made me very uncomfortable. And I can't lie, the Girls Next Door was guilty of a few offenses here and there. But maybe it was the constant reruns because regardless, I did stay tuned in. And of course, the attention grabber was the fact that the girls shared Hef as a boyfriend, and it didn't seem that they were allowed to have outside love interests. And that was a part of the show I didn't necessarily vibe with. When they would try to focus it back on Hef and their adoration for him, I would roll my eyes. Every time. And honestly, I feel like I ignored that part of the show as best as I could and just focused on the lives of the girls because again, Hef in my eyes was a perpetual senior citizen and there was no way these girls were doing boyfriend-girlfriend stuff with him or had any long-term plans with him. I refuse to believe it. And the show was more interesting when it just focused on the girls, even though it was totally misogynistic. Holly, Bridget, and Kendra made Girls Next Door and Playboy overall more palatable for me. I became interested in Playboy merchandise like t-shirts and sleepwear with a little bunny on it because instead of seeing Hef and his arsenal of clone girlfriend props, I saw Holly, Bridget, and Kendra. And I don't think I was alone because Girls Next Door was E's highest rated TV show while it aired. It became very popular, and we could see the girls' fame grow throughout the show. They were just as recognizable as Hugh Hefner in my opinion. I barely remember how the show ended. I think I was preparing for college around that time, so I wasn't really paying attention. I just remember each girl getting her own spinoff. And the spinoffs were Holly's World, Bridget's Beaches, and Kendra. And back on Girls Next Door, they had tried to replace them with 3 new blondes popping up in the 6th season. Of course, that was the last season. When the new girls flopped, the series ended promptly after. And honestly, I forgot about Holly and Bridget first. I remembered Kendra because during the show, she was my favorite. Plus, she was given a big special towards the finale of the series. And she was on a ton of reality shows, including Marriage Boot Camp and Wife Swap. Plus, the drama with her husband, starting when he lost the team Super Bowl that one time. Sheesh. So maybe a few years ago, Holly Madison's channel surfaced in my YouTube algorithm, and I subscribed.
Hey guys, it's me, Holly Madison. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a reaction video to the first episode of Girls Next Door. That's something you guys have been asking me to do for a while now. And at first I was like, okay, I know this is the most requested thing, but no way. Like, I didn't want to do it. I thought it would be miserable for me. I thought it would be very like living in the past, so I just never did it. But since then, I've been in a lot of meetings about Down the Rabbit Hole being turned into a 10-part TV limited series. And I know that as the writer gets into the script a little bit more, I might be asked a lot more questions about what went on. And because it is a 10-parter, they might need more information than just what's in my book. So I thought, you know what? Like, I haven't seen these episodes since they came out. So it's been like 10, 15 years for some of them. And let's try it and let's see how it is. And it's funny because when I was doing it, I was actually really enjoying watching it and recording the reactions. Like, I loved seeing like my dogs and Bridget's room and Mary and all the things like that. But by the end of the episode, I was actually pissed.
Holly Madison was the main girlfriend. She was the one who was shown to be the most dedicated to Hef throughout the show. On her YouTube channel, at the time, she was uploading a series where she revisited and reacted to all the Girls Next Door episodes. She would also upload Q&As and tours of her closet where she hoarded a ton of stuff from her Girls Next Door days. It was all very interesting, especially when she would spill the tea on the show and how she really felt about everything going on. And it was nice to hear that she was still friends with Bridget Marquardt. Of course, as nosy as I am, what I found most compelling were her stories from living in the mansion, filming the TV show, and her relationship with Hef. I could not believe the stuff that went down and how Hef would really treat the girls, especially Holly. I quickly became a fan and was super tuned into her YouTube. And I was extra delighted when she announced that she would be hosting a podcast alongside Bridget called Girls Next Level.
Welcome back to Girls Next Level, everybody. We are so excited to be back talking about Girls Next Door, Season 3, Episode 1, No Place Like Home. We're into the second half of the episode.
So, Girls Next Level is a podcast hosted by Holly Madison and Bridget Marquardt. The central concept of the podcast is the ladies recapping and reviewing each episode of the Girls Next Door while elaborating on everything going on in the episode, as well as spilling the real tea of what went on behind the scenes. So, it's another layer of the behind the scenes where they share the truth and reality of the show that was supposed to be a behind the scenes of the lifestyle of the brand. They share super in-depth details of their lives at the Playboy Mansion, as well as their perspectives, including personal feelings and experiences, both before and during the taping of the show. It is currently airing with new episodes every Monday, and although the series started out super casual with most of the taping at Holly or Bridget's crib or on a Zoom call, you can see as the years go by and the insane amount of ads that they are certainly leveling up. And as of Season 3, the girls are filming in their own studio. The ladies also reintroduced and interviewed special guests on the podcast whom either appeared on the Girls Next Door reality show or are somehow involved in the Playboy world, such as former playmates, former girlfriends, butlers, producers, the magazine photographer, Bridget's sister who appeared pretty regularly on the show, as well as Kendra's brother, and even Hef's son, just to name a few. Both Holly and Bridget share their individual stories of how they each ended up at the mansion, how they eventually moved in and joined originally as one of Hef's 7 girlfriends, which they both agree was a nightmare and the worst part of their lives at the mansion. They share how complicated it was for them to try to grow as a person, both mentally and professionally, while remaining Hef's girlfriends, and the pushback they received from trying to establish themselves as individuals. They even discuss the intimate parts of their relationship with Hef and his group of girlfriends, like what went on in the bedroom. Holly and Bridget both spent nearly a decade of their lives at the Playboy Mansion, so as you can imagine, they have a lot of stories to tell. They also don't shy away from speaking on the absence of Kendra Wilkinson, the third girlfriend who starred in the Girls Next Door, who is noticeably absent from the podcast, and their current relationship with her. What I appreciate about this podcast is how honest the girls are about their experiences, and although they have faced backlash, judgment, and ridicule for their life choices and image, they are very intentional about sharing their side of the story of their lives, which is not only really brave, but so interesting. Side note, please forgive me. I know I keep calling them girls. I don't mean it in a demeaning way. I know they are women in their 40s now. I also can tell that they've sought out therapy and really evolved mentally from the mindset they had at the mansion. This is even true for myself. When I go back and watch The Girls Next Door as an adult, I too can point out some sketchiness that went over my head as a teenager. It's clear that the ladies now recognize a lot of harmful things that happened to them at the mansion, as well as derogatory ways the TV show intentionally portrayed them. And a lot of the podcast they spend pointing it out. And that may be the most compelling part of the podcast for me. And although they do share a lot of good things about Hef and their life at the mansion, what captivates me most is the dark side of their lives. So many of their experiences are pretty shocking and concerning, as you can probably imagine given the circumstances of being one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends. Hef's behavior, per Holly and Bridget, was very shocking. Although they do share positive qualities about him, like how he was a kid at heart, loved the holidays, was big about friendships and gatherings, and very charismatic, he is revealed to also being super petty, jealous, and insecure. Now, knowing he's an Aries man, it kind of makes sense. But like I said earlier, I assumed that a man of his means would be capable of having multiple relationships. I thought establishing a brand like Playboy would make him more respectful towards women and their autonomy. But the more I listen to Holly and Bridget discuss their experiences, the more I see that he was actually very chauvinistic. Just goes to show that wealth does not equate to integrity, maturity, and, well, respect towards women. Who would have thought? She said sarcastically.
But this was an interesting meeting because it was our first time really sitting down with the executive producer that wasn't like an on-camera interview. And he was telling us about how we were going to be stars. And how
he kept
we
saying, "You're going to be stars.
My stars." And he would do this weird wavy thing with his fingers. and then I remember at one point in the meal, Kendra said, "Shouldn't we be getting paid for this?" And all of a sudden the mood changed.
Like that.
It was like clouds covered the sun. And Kevin...
It started thunderstorm.
Yeah, basically. And Kevin very seriously was like, stared her down and was like, "You are replaceable." And he went on to say that like this show was about the Playboy Mansion and Hef, and it was not about us. It was just about who happened to live there. And there were tons of girls, lined up ready to take our spots, and we could be replaced at any minute.
Yep.
And we already get room and board and food, which is kind of offensive because we kind of had to pay for those things. We had to earn those things. You know what I mean? It wasn't just handed to us out of the goodness of Hef's heart. There was a high cost for living there, in my opinion.
And they meant it.
Yeah, so we were very shot down. It was a shocker. Like, it felt like you were being reprimanded in school. It was like, whoa.
Yeah, and it wasn't even like Kendra was like, "I lawyered up," or "I agented up and you need to pay me." It was just like, well, wait, aren't we going to get paid for this?
Yeah, it was simply a question. And she was very kind of like meek the way she answered it, or asked it. Like, I remember her being like, "So shouldn't we be getting paid for this?" Like, it was just like that. It was cash.
Right.
And it changed the mood so hard.
So we'll be stars, but you're just not going to get paid for it.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I know, Bridget, in the meantime, like you've spoke with somebody who used to work with Kevin, and she was very much under the impression that it was Hef's decision for us not to get paid. Mm-hmm. And clearly by the time we had this luncheon, like Kevin was on board with Hef, but she also said that there got to be a point where Kevin felt guilty and was like, "We need to pay these girls something."
Yeah, that's what she told me. She said that the decision to not pay us came directly from Altaloma. And Altaloma was Playboy's production company that was headed by Hef and Dick Rosenzweig.
Yeah, so it's basically speaking for Hef.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just like, "No, the girls are taken care of." So
that is their payment.
There we go.
I was shocked to find out that Hef did not want to pay them for the TV show, and they weren't properly paid for the first season. He would try to downplay the show's success as well as emphasize how replaceable the girls were and how lucky they were to have the opportunity, which is so cruel and revealed itself to not even be true, as we saw with the flop of the last season and their replacements. And life for Holly and Bridget was worse before the show. Their source of income was an allowance given by Hef, but they would have to hunt him down to receive it. And if you were on your period too often or didn't go out with him enough that pay period, he would try to withhold it. And that money was normally used to keep up their appearances. They were discouraged, if allowed at all, to seek out any kind of employment or financial opportunities outside of the mansion and being his girlfriend. And I say discouraged, but honestly to me, it sounds like they weren't allowed. Holly and Bridget shared that Hef's girlfriends had a curfew. I think it was 7 or 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, I think. And Hef would throw a tantrum and even threaten to evict them if they missed it. Before the TV show, they were always in fear of being kicked out, which is legitimately scary anywhere, but just imagine being broke and homeless in Los Angeles. Hef was really manipulating. They had to follow his rules, which were insanely controlling, like not being able to cut their hair, dye their hair, or wear red lipstick. Hef would also try to pit his girlfriends against each other. He would dangle carrots, so to speak, such as opportunities he knew that they desired and play on their insecurities. Holly expressed how she felt like Hef would show Kendra special treatment in several situations just to spite her. And back before the show and Kendra's arrival, there were 7 girlfriends. Holly and Bridget expressed that life at the mansion was extremely miserable. Like, imagine being in a polyamorous relationship with the meanest girls in your high school and being intentionally isolated from the outside world, so that relationship and all its drama is your life. Thankfully, the show and the decreased number of girlfriends made life at the mansion improve significantly for the most part.
But how long did it take you before you were like, this place kind of sucks sometimes?
I have mixed feelings about how I should answer that, because for me, in a lot of ways, the novelty never wore off. Like, I still love it, and I still am happy about my memories, most of them, and excited about it. But there were times that were so awful there that I definitely had a plan B. Yeah. And there were times that was so bad that I was 1 foot out the door. Like, I definitely was like, that's it. I can't do this anymore. But they weren't because of Hef, or at least I didn't think so at the time. They weren't because of Hef, and they weren't because of the mansion, they weren't because of Playboy. It was the other girls.
Yeah, it was such a layered thing, because at the time, I thought the whole reason I was miserable there was the other girls, and if they were just gone, everything would be okay, and I could finally get what I wanted out of the situation, finally be happy. And looking back, I know that's not all the case. I know Hef was majorly into drama. He always wanted to be feeling like he was fought over, and he definitely encouraged the drama. But that being said, there were still a handful of girls, not everybody, because there were some nice girls too, but there were a handful of girls who were truly terrible.
Yes.
Who I still, I hope they're doing better today. I hope they've evolved, but
I've heard they have not.
Oh, are you kidding? Oh my God.
There was also a lot of shadiness going on with production. Holly and Bridget both expressed how several times throughout the taping of Girls Next Door, they would be intentionally humiliated or have their characters sabotaged. For example, in the first season, the show portrays Bridget as being jealous of the playmates, and during a night out with them, she is edited encouraging the girls to drink heavily, knowing they have a big photo shoot the next morning. According to Bridget, these clips were cut together to create the scenario that never happened, and as you can imagine, Bridget was extremely upset with seeing herself portrayed in such an evil way. Because it's Playboy, nudity, femininity, and sexuality would be encompassed in the show naturally, but the girls were given the impression that they would still be protected, and those aspects of the show would be played up in a positive or cute way that would complement them. The girls didn't know their nudity wouldn't be blurred when the show aired, specifically on the DVD releases. They felt extremely violated and betrayed by this.
At that point in time, I just want to remind everybody, we are not getting paid for this show.
No, not at all.
And I know that it's going to air on E.
And not to cut in, but we're paying for our own Southwest flights, paying for the cake. The only thing free for us is the Palm Suite.
Right.
Buying our own outfits. Not only are we not getting paid, but we're going out of our way to try and make the show as cute as we can out of our own pockets.
But it was my thought that those type of scenes where there's nudity involved would be blurred.
Because you can't show it on E without it being blurred. We had no idea that they didn't blur the footage in foreign countries, or that they would try to put, and they did, put the unblurred footage on a DVD. We never signed off on that.
Yeah, because I'm watching the DVDs and it's full-blown nudity right now. And I'm like, wow.
And like I said, they do invite and have producers of the reality show on the podcast. And it's interesting to hear the discussions around the things that happened that they didn't like nor understand, and the perspective from the producers from a professional level.
Hey, I'm Holly. I'm originally from Alaska, and I live now at the Playboy Mansion. I'm Hef's #1 girlfriend.
While watching The Girls Next Door, I never felt like I understood Holly's personality, especially compared to Kendra and Bridget. She was shown to be the main girlfriend and in love with Hef, kinda silly at times, but that was pretty much it. So it was really cool getting to know her from her YouTube channel and then later on the podcast. Turns out she's super funny, an animal lover, a big nerd, and a Disney adult, which I love and totally relate to. In Girls Next Door, Holly was shown to have a lot of interest in the Playmates and the magazine. Holly even apprenticed at Playboy Studios West, which we find out through the podcast was a big aspiration of hers and one of the responsibilities that brought her a lot of pride. especially because Hef in the show didn't like her to have much of an identity outside of loving Hef. Holly points out that the show's editing made her seem super catty and possessive over Hef. She felt like they intentionally diluted her real personality. After listening to the podcast, I feel like Holly had the most difficult time at the mansion and was treated the worst, mostly due to being the main girlfriend and being there the longest. Holly didn't have her own space once becoming the main girlfriend. She had to share a room with Hef, who apparently was a hoarder. That alone would depress me. I'm a person who needs my own space, especially physical space, relationship or not. The impression I got was that Hef was very controlling and totally a narcissist. A lot of what Holly describes that she went through as his girlfriend, in my opinion, is abuse. And just mean for no reason. It's so sad when I hear her say that Hef didn't like to see her have fun or be too excited about things and would always try to rain on her parade. Especially because that is not the edit they gave him in Girls Next Door, which makes it extra malicious. He didn't allow her to stray far away from him at parties, so she couldn't walk around and mingle with guests. She always had to be seated near him. And of course, she had to leave whenever he left, which she says she didn't mind half the time because she's an introvert. Hef also had a rule where the girls were not allowed to be too friendly and fraternize with the mansion staff. She really wasn't allowed to travel without him. She says the show gave her more of an opportunity to travel since Hef loved the show and it made him money. But noticeably, the trips were really short and sometimes she was the only one who had to return back in the same day. And although I said earlier several times that the whole dating an old man is just so unfathomable to me, listening to Holly, I can actually see how she could have been happy with him if he would have just treated her better majority of the time. Holly said she was drawn to Hef because of his charisma and they had a lot of common interests. She was an introvert who loved to stay at home and the two of them enjoyed watching old movies together. And although Bridget and Kendra were there for a good time, not a long time, Holly truly did have long-term plans to be with Hef genuinely. Holly truly wanted marriage and family, but it seemed Hef had already been there, done that, and he didn't seem to want to give Holly that until it was too late and she left. Holly did get a super cute spin-off series dedicated to her post-mansion life called Holly's World. It followed her life in Vegas as a peep show performer. Super cute. In an interview with Marsden, Hef's son, he mentions that when Hef met Crystal, the lady he eventually married after Holly left him, that he regretted letting Holly get away and he rushed to marry Crystal so he wouldn't make that same mistake again.
And then he would also say that he wasn't going to make, what he said about you. He's like, he wasn't going to make the same mistake that he made with Holly. Yeah, so he wasn't going to.
He said that?
Yeah, he would say that.
I feel like Hef truly did regret losing Holly. And in my opinion, I feel like Crystal was his karma. The interview with Hef's son is very interesting. I suggest you guys check it out. After listening to the podcast, it makes sense that I never got a good understanding of Holly's personality because according to her, the production team intentionally kept that out of the show. We never got a good look into her personal interests in the same way as the other girlfriends, Bridget and Kendra, at least not right away. I'm excited that Holly's book, Down the Rabbit Hole, is going to be made into a TV series. I think that's a really good idea for a TV show and I cannot wait. And I think it's cute how she wants Sydney Sweeney to play Bridget.
Originally, I'm from Lodi, California, little town. And I've been coming around for about 4 years, but actually living here at the mansion for just over 3 years. I am one of them, one of the girlfriends.
Bridget was the girlfriend with the cutest, most girliest voice. I always felt like the stereotypical Playboy bunny girl personality and image comes from Bridget's likeness. And she mentions that on the podcast how we saw that happen in the movie House Bunny. One thing I remember about Girls Next Door was how cute her room was. So much pink, which I love. She was shown to be super in love with her pets, and a lot of her episodes were pet-centered. She was always shown dressing them up, they had little photo shoots, birthday parties, and what was really cute to me was how both pets, a cat and a dog, had black fur coats, which totally contrasts the pinkness in her room, but still made sense for her since she was also super into spooky stuff. She was noticeably super sporty, which is interesting because as she reflects on the podcast, the show would intentionally fat shame her and portray her as being the foodie girlfriend who always wanted to diet but lacked the discipline to stick with it. And honestly, before I started listening to the podcast and was reintroduced to Bridget, that is what I remembered of her from the show. Those scenes stuck out to me too. Bridget was definitely the middle child of the group, kind of ignored, which is actually kind of crazy because, as she points out on the podcast, she was always trying to find activities, try new things, and do all kinds of fun stuff with the girls for the show. She's big into party planning and hosting, very Libra. Bridget also mentions how she is very athletic, but because being athletic or sporty was Kendra's thing, she wasn't allowed to be shown on the show having athletic hobbies, although it was a big part of her life and routine, which I can totally tell she hated being excluded. Also typical Libra. However, she was always shown to be super sweet, positive, and excited. She seemed to really enjoy the social perks of being a girlfriend and living at the mansion. Bridget, especially in contrast with Holly, seemed really content with her life at the mansion and had plans to always keep Playboy in her life, even when she moved on from being a girlfriend. And during the podcast, she often expresses how much she misses her life there. Out of the trio, I think Bridget had the best experience at the mansion. And I think a big part of that was how she was very clear on what her goals were and centered them while using her status as Hef's girlfriend and exposure to the Playboy brand to get opportunities that were related to her goals and career. Prior to moving into the mansion, Bridget had earned her degree in either communications or broadcast journalism. And she was in school pursuing her master's during the filming of Girls Next Door. While on Girls Next Door, she was shown taking voiceover lessons from one of Hef's friends and notable voice actor Chuck McCann, and she also had a radio show with her puppy Wednesday, of course. Most of her reflections of her time spent there are positive, and I think it's because she moved into the mansion with the best mindset. She was very ambitious. In the podcast, Bridget shares how she wanted to be a playmate and that being on the magazine was her goal for moving in with Hef and the girls. She wasn't looking for love or lifelong commitments. At the same time, she enjoyed the opportunities and fun experiences she was offered. Although she is not in denial about the mistreatment she experienced, I think having her own space and not having as high girlfriend expectations from Hef made it easier for her to prioritize herself and what she wanted to get out of her time there. And although Holly tried to go cold turkey on Hef in the mansion as soon as she left, Bridget had expectations of still keeping the mansion as part of her life and tried to stay on good terms with Hef, Kendra, Holly, everybody, following Girls Next Door. I remember Bridget's spinoff show because I would see it while channel surfing after Winx Club and Bratz ended on 4Kids. Her show was very fitting and ahead of its time. It was called Bridget's Beaches or Bridget's Sexiest Beaches, and she would travel the world and tour all the coolest beaches on the globe. I feel like this is a show that a lot of women would appreciate today, especially since traveling has become such a trend.
Did any of the queens refuse marriage with the king? Because those kings look pretty nasty, like old and I'm not saying old, I'm saying like nasty, you know?
I really appreciate that both Bridget and Holly don't shy away from the topic of Kendra. Holly and Bridget expressed that Kendra, being the youngest, the forever new girl, and having spent the least amount of time at the mansion, didn't quite have the same experiences as they did, and there was a big disconnect between them. From what I gather, listening to the podcast, Holly and Bridget were held to a different standard and weren't allowed as much freedom that Hef gave Kendra. Kendra was allowed to get her own outside manager and do party promotions, while Holly and Bridget early on were told they weren't allowed to do. They even feel like producers, or rather a certain producer, early on in the taping of the show, was biased towards Kendra, which is why she received more favorable edits compared to them. But after a couple seasons, according to Bridget and Holly, it seems that Kendra tried to force a wedge between her and her sister girlfriends as well. They do talk about the times they all got along and bonded, but Kendra had a lot of favoritism when it came to the show and Hef. And at least to me, it seems like she especially didn't like Holly. And even in her more recent interviews, she insists that they were never friends. Kendra was the self-proclaimed tomboy, and she is often seen scoffing at the more girlier activities that Holly and Bridget like to do, like the doggy birthday party. And it kind of seems like Kendra is one of those girls who doesn't like to get along with women who think and act differently than her. I also wouldn't be surprised if Holly might have intimidated Kendra, and that's why she seems to especially not like her. But honestly, Kendra being so young and living in Hugh Hefner's world as one of his girlfriends probably caused a lot of trauma that she didn't even understand or impact until much later. From listening to Holly and Bridget's perspectives as they recap the show and moments with Kendra seemed to consistently try to exclude herself from the other girls and straight up refuse to participate in things that they were shooting for the show, which made things difficult, not only for Holly and Bridget, but the producers too. She seemed to have major attitude in an immature way, which makes sense given that she moved into the mansion at 19, I believe, but it also made her sound kind of selfish and a jerk. And I get that these girls aren't sisters and they don't have to necessarily be friends with each other just because they're sharing the same boyfriend. But you can tell that Holly and Bridget, coming from an experience where there were 7 girlfriends and life was extremely catty, uncomfortable, and dramatic, that they really wanted to keep the peace amongst each other in order to avoid having a toxic living environment again, from what they could control. Because, as I mentioned, Hef and a few producers seemed to like making the girls uncomfortable and jealous of each other. But Kendra, having missed that experience completely, coming into the mansion right before the show, seems to come off kinda spoiled and bratty. Back when the Girls Next Door first debuted, I think Kendra was most viewers' favorite. She was funny, wild, and a hot mess. The producers definitely gave her the dumb blonde edit, and although she was super into football and everything sports, they showed her failing a lot at most sports that she tried. A lot of the time, you can tell the producers had fun with showing the imperfections of the girls, and one of Kendra's was being messy and late all the time, and oh my gosh, her room was a 4.5. Like, crazy messy all the time. But I think that's what people loved about her. So it's really interesting hearing Holly and Bridget's perspective from behind the scenes. And now as I rewatch, being older and having more life experience, I can totally see what Holly and Bridget are talking about in reference to Kendra. I wonder how much of my preference towards her were favorable edits intentionally created by the network and producers. Because the show does kind of set you up to favorite Kendra as well. And it's crazy hearing how difficult she was behind the scenes, contrast with how favorable they make her on the show. From an interview they had with a producer, it was clear that Kendra did not have long-term plans to stay at the mansion. She wanted to benefit from her opportunities and meet an athlete. They even said that she secretly dated while being in a relationship with Hef. And that to me is actually the more realistic route. I thought most girls would have that mindset while being at the mansion. The ladies often mention how, in their opinion, Kendra didn't have much invested in staying with Hef, which is why he didn't treat her as strictly as he did Holly and Bridget. And there were moments when Kendra showed, through her failure to cooperate, that she was 1 foot out of the door.
So they cut to Kendra in confessional, and she says something to the effect of, when I looked out and saw the snow, I was like, I'm going to get my snowboard. And she's acting like she's so excited.
Yes.
But that was the furthest thing from the truth.
So like I said, it's been so long since I've seen these episodes. And when I was watching this scene right now, I was like, wait, what? Because she acts like she's so excited about this, like totally into it, anticipating it, like gonna do her snowboard and everything. And this was not her attitude at all. I don't know how to even like put this all into words, but she hated that we were doing anything. She refused to come out of her room. She locked her door. Nobody could go in there and talk to her. She was being a total brat for hours. Well, for a long time, we weren't even allowed to go out there because they wanted us all to go out together. All the other girls are showing up. She won't even get out of bed or come down. The producers are trying to talk to her. Hef's trying to coax her out. Later, Hef gets involved. He wasn't up yet. Then her family comes and they go up into her room and are trying to get her to come down and participate. She was being a complete brat, arguing with everybody and refusing to do it. She thought it was dumb.
She thought the snow was dumb?
Yes. And then she also said she didn't want to come out and she didn't want to be a part of the show and she didn't want to do any of that stuff and because she had acne.
Kendra and Holly are beefing right now. And keep in mind, I am paraphrasing, but after leaving the mansion, Holly and Kendra wrote books about their experiences, and they both felt contradicted by what the other had said. When Holly wrote her book, Down the Rabbit Hole, which gave her honest feelings and experiences of life at the mansion, Kendra seemed to take offense to that and wanted to protect Hef's reputation. Now, it's been quite a while since their post-mansion feud began, but even I have noticed Kendra undermining specifically Holly in interviews she's had about their mansion life. However, I think now she's starting to understand herself how manipulated and controlled they all were. And although she loved Hef, they all did at one point, he wasn't always the best for them, especially as young women. He didn't always do right by them. And the sugar baby life isn't always as glammed up as it's presented, and that's putting it gently. Kendra, across several platforms, has discredited Holly's trauma from living in the mansion as Hugh Hefner's #1 girlfriend, and pretty much gives that generalization that literally every woman who I try to discuss the show with says to me. They knew what they were getting into. I know I mentioned that during my teen years and viewing the show that Kendra was my favorite, and that was true then. But since listening to the Girls Next Level podcast and hearing what went down behind the scenes, I can now pick up on Kendra a little better, and I see where Holly and Bridget are coming from. Kendra was super young when she joined the mansion, and from Holly's perspective, Hef let her get away with so much and intentionally favored her to antagonize Holly and cause division amongst the girls. Even though I totally get it, it's too bad Kendra will never be a guest on Girls Next Level. I know both Holly and Bridget have left the door open to her, but in my opinion, judging by her recent interviews, Kendra is just now starting to understand the negative impacts that living at the mansion had and is dealing with that on her own.
And it makes me think about how also Playboy has like tried to erase us from their history, which I think is kind of funny. And this started happening before I wrote my book, you guys, because if it would have happened after I wrote my book, I would totally understand. But it started happening to all three of us maybe like a year to a year and a half after we moved out. And the reason this is odd, like I'm not sitting here being conceited like, oh my God, we're so great. They need to like pay homage to us all the time. But the way Playboy operated, and we were very familiar with how they operated, was Playboy was always very deferential to its own history. Like they were always printing like retrospectives and best ofs, and they were always very proud of their history. And like, but I started noticing after about a year and a half, because I would still get Playboys sent to my house, and I like looking at them because I was curious about, oh, what are they doing with the centerfolds these days and stuff. And I noticed they would do things like they would have a pictorial of the greatest blondes in all of Playboy's history. And this was only like 2 years after we left. Like our spinoffs were still on E, like we were still relevant. And I thought for sure, oh, I'm going to have to rip a picture out for my scrapbook because we're going to be in it. Nope.
Yeah,
not at all.
I remember.
You can tell from the podcast episodes that Bridget and Holly really knew and understood Hef. They can elaborate on his personality, his friendships, his background, and so many Playboy magazine and brand facts. You can tell that they had huge respect for the Playboy brand, and it's sad because through Hef's cruelness and pettiness, he lost 2, possibly 3 representatives of his brand that he worked so hard to create and obviously valued. They essentially were a huge part of his legacy. It's really sad how he chose to treat them. And when production and Hef chose to replace them with the twins and Crystal, who he later married, to me, that was intended to be a slap in the face to Holly, Bridget, and Kendra. The ladies consistently mentioned how they were told that they were replaceable, and when they finally decided to move on, they were essentially replaced. But, as we saw, it did not have the same success that the original girls brought to the show and ended soon after. That last season was weird, and dating twins is just gross. And although I understand that Bridget and Holly don't always like to be consistently associated with Playboy, the Girls Next Door and now Girls Next Level to this day keep the Playboy brand relevant. Holly also has a TV show airing called The Playboy Murders, which if you're a true crime girly, this is definitely for you. I can't watch true crime stuff right now. I already have enough anxiety going to the grocery store late at night. And Bridget just debuted her new podcast called Ghost Bunny. So through them, the legacy continues. Hef, or whoever was in charge of his life following the breakup and departure of the girls, made sure to pretty much block them from the mansion, the parties, and essentially his life as he got older and eventually sick. Holly and Bridget expressed that Hef loved to be around his friends, and it seemed in his last days that he was kept very isolated. It's sad to know that Bridget, who had so many positive memories of her life at the mansion, wasn't allowed to see Hef in his final days, nor go to his funeral. In an interview they had with former playmate Sarah Underwood, she discusses how Hef was treated in the final days that she knew him and how it broke her heart.
So he started dating the twins and Crystal, and I'll start by saying I don't really know Crystal all that well at all, but she's always been very nice to me. I will say that. Every interaction I had, she's been nice. I don't have like personal beef with her, but my one memory is like I was on my way out and I got invited up to to go play Uno with, I think maybe one other playmate was up there. I don't recall who it was, but then it was the twins, Crystal and Hef. And I really didn't know them all that well. It's kind of awkward, but I got invited, so I went. And I felt very like protective of him, and even though like y'all left on like your own accord, I just still felt like, who are these new girls, you know, whatever. That's just like human nature. But we were playing, and you know, he gets like pissy and irritable or whatever, and they were like, you guys were always like sweet and professional in a way, like, if you will, and they were just like goofing off, like not paying attention, whatever. And that was like frustrating him, and he was like getting visually frustrated because he wanted the game to move on and they weren't paying attention and they were just talking amongst themselves or whatever. And he gets frustrated and they're like rolling their eyes at him, like, oh God, and like whispering about him like to each other, and just like it was just all like really disrespectful, and like I never saw that with you guys ever. Maybe you did, but like I never saw that. Like there was always like a huge level of respect going on and care and love, or you know, whatever. And I just didn't see that. I saw people that like didn't seem to care about him, thought he was annoying, thought he was a joke, and so I hated it. I felt icky. I felt mad. I felt protective over him, you know, and yeah, that was it.
I honestly think if Hef would have kept Holly, Bridget, and Kendra around and made peace with them, he would have been treated very differently in his final days.
On the internet back then, like if I wanted to Google Hugh Hefner back then, it would have been like his bio on playboy.com. Like there wouldn't have been like a whole Reddit page about girls who've gone up to the mansion and what they experienced, because I hate it when people want to like chime in the comments and be like, any of those girls talking about their experiences should have known what they were getting into. It's like, yeah, you guys know because I talked about it in my book 7 years ago, but there wasn't stuff like that back then. Like all I knew about Hef was he was kind of like a controversial figure and lived an unconventional lifestyle, but he very much seemed like respectable and mainstream at that point, and just like he was a nice guy. That was kind of the image.
Yeah, I just thought he was married with kids, and whatever he had done like in the past, like, you know, that was crazy or whatever was like the past. Like I didn't even, at this point, where we're at right now, I did not even know that he was like dating or nothing.
Well, we would soon find out.
Whenever I recommend the Girls Next Level podcast or bring up the girls next door to other women, the response I get is often very judgmental. When I express empathy for the gaslighting and mistreatment the ladies went through while living at the mansion, the collective response is often, these girls knew what they signed up for, which implies that the ladies can't be victims of the situation and any hardships they express is ultimately their fault and their fault alone. The lack of empathy from other women really irritates me. And while I can somewhat understand where they're coming from, because choosing to be a girlfriend of Hugh Hefner is certainly a choice, it still amazes me how it feels like I'm in the minority of women who feel empathy towards these girls and don't necessarily place the entire blame of them for choosing this path in life. Holly and Bridget often revisit moments where they were humiliated and harassed outside of the mansion, like when doing press for the TV show, when TV hosts, women included, will ask them the most derogatory questions about their relationship and unprofessionally show how little respected they felt towards them because of their association with Playboy and their lifestyle. Or how restaurants, certain products, or even public events would try to ban them from attending or referencing their existence on the show.
Yeah. Well, and you guys, we have talked about how, you know, we've got with the reviews that came in, we've talked about the e-message boards. We had religious groups after us. We had the Florida Family Association after us. We had advertisers threatening. Like we had like a lot of shit going down on us at the start.
Yeah, and I don't think we were ever trying to do anything risque on camera. Like we always thought, you know, some nudity here and there was funny or whatever, but we weren't trying to like show sex life or anything like that. We were just trying to do our usual activities.
They always blamed the girls for being the reputation of Playboy and branded them as, you know, Jezebel Slory type of women, when the whole point of the show was showing how there is more to the girls and the Playmates alike than their stereotypes. And at the end of the day, the girls were just women working and profiting in an industry that centered female sexuality and hyperfemininity. And it's crazy that the women get the most judgment for being associated with Playboy instead of the men in charge of the production or patronage of the brand. Naturally, being blonde, young, with boobs, natural or not, there is a specific type of bullying that these type of women get for their appearance and image, and a lot of that comes from misogyny. Despite men being the biggest demand of women who look like this, even though these same men benefit the most from women who choose this particular sugar baby lifestyle, they are the most cruel and vocal about their hatred towards these type of women. And I feel like there are so many examples of these kind of men, specifically on the podcast platform, ironically. Since the pandemic, I have noticed an influx of men who express their hatred for women who prioritize their looks, their life, or education, and have the audacity to have agency over their own sexuality and autonomy. While they spew hatred and try to place shame on these kind of women, they simultaneously are demanding that these same women be interested in an unfulfilling relationship with them. It is truly asinine. But what's crazier is how so many women have also taken on this mindset. And maybe it's for attention, maybe it's money, maybe it's because they see women like this as a threat to their own insecurities or their relationship with men who they know have a secret or not so secret interest or desire towards these women. But women too have created spaces on these platforms to demonize women for having free will, making mistakes, or choosing a non-traditional lifestyle, or just posing nude, especially if they profit from it. And it's always sad because the women really do get the short end of the stick. I think one of the reasons I have so much empathy towards Holly, Bridget, and Kendra, other than being a decent human being, is because as a Black woman, I relate to a specific form of bullying where it is also focused on our existence and image alone, and that is called misogynoir. It's kind of crazy because out of all the video essays in my Black girl representation playlist that hit on different instances of misogynoir, I think this is the first time I've ever spoken the word on my channel out loud. Misogynoir is a term referring to the combined force of anti-Black racism and misogyny directed towards Black women, and it is so rampant. And as I always mention, has very real and lethal consequences to our everyday life. The fact that Black women had to have a law passed to prohibit hair discrimination in workplaces and classrooms to protect us from being dismissed, fired, or excluded from opportunities for wearing our natural hair as it grows out of our head is outrageous and so evil. I'm talking about the Crown Act, which only passed in 25 of the 50 United States of America as of July 2024. Not including the state I reside in now, by the way. And also, according to the CDC, Black women have a significantly higher maternal mortality rate than white women in the United States, which is even more insane to think about when you consider that we're only half of 13% of the population of this country. This is due to a lot of medical professionals not taking Black women seriously when they come in for healthcare. In addition, according to statistics released by the FBI, violence against Black women is surging, with Black women being murdered at least 4 times per day, and is typically by the person they're in a relationship with. And ignorant people like to attempt to reduce these very haunting statistics down to preferences and whatever, but misogynoir is life-threatening. And from personal experience, it's a hard reality to live in. Like every day, I wake up trying to go about my day, living my life, and minding my Black-owned business, when unprovoked, I hear an irritating, grainy voice.
What is the Black girlfriend effect? This is
you don't know about
just glow up the other culture.
Yeah, so you'll see a guy who's had a Black girlfriend, all of a sudden he's got buzz cut, like clean shape up. Glows up, bro.
Yeah, I like that. They shave their hair because they start losing it. Because they're so stressed being around this Black girl complaining about it. That's why they gotta shave their hair.
Nah, bro. White guys with Black girlfriends, they
grow a beard because there's more cushion when they get slapped the f out of them. That's hilarious. I think the Black girlfriend effect. It might be a protective instinct, bro.
You think?
Protective. Yeah. Do you guys have you ever had Black girlfriends?
Yeah.
Have you ever had white girls?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. What's your favorite?
We love them all.
Yeah. Oh, really?
We love them all.
Yeah.
That means white.
Yo, who gets
And what's crazy is, while I'm not surprised from being attacked by racist shrimp losers, the co-signing of Black men is always an extra gut punch. Although, given their extensive track record, I should not be surprised by the least. I think because I deal with misogynoir on such extreme levels, both within and outside the community, especially being a dark-skinned, monoracial, unambiguous Black woman, I am more sensitive to other forms of misogyny, and I can definitely recognize it, whether blatant or subtle, and I have zero tolerance for it. I automatically will always sympathize with the woman. And I get it. A lot of people have beef with those who live unconventional lifestyles, regardless if that oh so controversial lifestyle was only a season of their life. And because minding your own business and ignoring it is apparently not an option for people, they result in bullying or just platforming their hatred. As the ladies discussed on the Girls Next Level podcast, there were some instances where very shocking things would happen as a result of that environment. And while I kinda see how people can surface level think in a way for judging the former girlfriends of Hugh Hefner, for me, I put most of the blame on the person who remained in control, and that was Hugh Hefner. We live in a patriarchal society. No matter how you try to flip it, dip it, slice it, dice it, men hold most of the power everywhere, especially over women. And it was clear that even though he was outnumbered, Hef was absolutely the dynamic of the Playboy Mansion. There is so much lack of empathy towards women whose careers or image is associated with sexuality, hyperfemininity, or even appealing to the male gaze. And while I get no one likes a pick-me, if there is a high demand of a service, I don't agree with shifting the entire shame and blame on the supply, especially from fellow women. I feel like it is such an out-of-touch mindset to have, especially when we have seen how so many powerful men use their wealth, status, connections, and fame to lure, use, and control and abuse women in the most unethical, traumatizing ways, especially as a woman. Like, have you never had a job? And I'm guessing both Holly and Bridget got sick of the misogynistic narrative as well and wanted to use this podcast to not only reflect on their previous lives and reconnect with their past connections, which is the fun side of the podcast. Don't get me wrong, there is a lot of fun in this podcast as well, but they've used it to broadcast their side of the story. And I'm so glad they did, because they've launched what is probably my favorite podcast of the moment. Girls Next Level is so interesting, and I think you guys should check it out. So let me know in the comments, have you guys watched The Girls Next Door or even heard of it? Are you a listener of the Girls Next Level podcast? I've been listening for years and it totally appeals to my nosy nature. Also, let me know, were you a fan or interested in the Playboy brand before Girls Next Door? Thank you so much for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel. If you're a fan of video essays or just want to listen to someone yap on endlessly about the many things that float around in my brain while you're doing other things, please check out my other video essays. The game you see me playing on screen right now is called One Night Burlesque. I've played it through on my channel as well. I thought it was relevant because the main character is a burlesque performer and her name is Holly too. Alright, bye!